Hello everyone, so today I'm making a book review of Thomas Mann's Tonio Kröger, which is a short story by the German author. So what is the book about? The book is about this young man named Tonio Kröger, and each chapter is a small episode or scene of his life at different ages. So throughout this short story, we see the development of this young man. So the book opens on a sunny winter day. You have the sun shining in the sky and the snow glistening on the streets. So the book begins with Tonio Kröger standing outside on the schoolyard. School has just closed for the day, and he's out waiting for his friend Hans Hansen, whom he has together with agreed to take a walk after school. And Tonio Kröger is very excited because he admires this friend of his, Hans Hansen, very much. You can see he almost idolizes him a little bit. So Hans Hansen comes out from school, and he's together with this group of other young boys walking. And Hans Hansen, he walks down the stairs and he sees Tonio Kröger waiting for them. And when Hansen sees Tonio standing there, his facial expression is a bit confused. And Tonio Kröger observes this and feels a profound sorrow because he realizes that Hans Hansen has forgotten that they were supposed to walk home from school. He is distracted, or he is hanging out with this larger group of young boys, and he has forgotten about Tonio Kröger and the walk. And he feels this profound melancholy, which Thomas Mann describes really well, of this insight that something that he so much looked forward to, this walk with Hans Hansen, and Hans Hansen has completely forgotten it. And I think many people sympathize with Tonio Kröger in the situation, can sort of know what he feels, because many of us have been in the situation where we have a friend who is perhaps more popular than us, and we are in this constant battle for their attention with the other people around them. And it's this really melancholy situation, because you love this person, you admire this person so much, and his or her attention means so much to you, but when this attention is directed to someone else, you feel so melancholy, so disappointed, so empty. But Hans Hansen, so when he sees Tonio Kröger, he says goodbye to the group of boys he's hanging out with, who's coming out from school, and he agrees, and he goes on the walk with Tonio Kröger. And Hans Hansen, as we will see later on in the book, is this very kind and noble figure, very admirable, and he sees that Tonio Kröger is a bit melancholy, and Hans Hansen knows the reason behind Tonio's melancholy. It's because he thinks that he has forgotten the walk together. So Hans Hansen tells this, we don't know if it's a white lie or if he's being honest, but most likely it's a white lie. He says that, oh, Tonio, I didn't forget about our walk together. It was just, I thought because of the wet and windy weather that it would have been cancelled and that you had gone home. But I'm really pleased that you stood and waited for me, because I want to have this walk with you. So from hearing these words, Tonio is reconciled a bit. He feels joy at these words from his friends, but deep down he knows that it's a white lie. But it doesn't matter, because Tonio Kröger admires Hans Hansen so much. So even if it's a white lie, even if Hansen would have rather been with his other friends, he still enjoys it, because he just so enjoys the company of his beloved friend Hans Hansen. And Tonio Kröger even says at a point that he loved Hans Hansen, and this can of course be interpreted as a brotherly love between schoolboys, but it can also be interpreted as a sort of homosexual love. So homosexual love is another theme of Thomas Mann's great book Death in Venice, which is also included in this edition. And this book is basically about an older man traveling to Venice and falling in love with this young boy. So themes of homosexual love, and especially forbidden homosexual love, is a part of Thomas Mann's work. So Tonio Kröger loves Hans Hansen, and Hans Hansen is portrayed as this perfect person. He is popular, He has a bunch of friends, but he's also noble and kind. He is both intelligent, he receives good grades in school, but is also athletic and strong. So he takes, for example, riding lessons, and he is portrayed as this very active and masculine person, whilst at the same time being very compassionate and kind. So he's portrayed as this perfect, complete person. So Hans Hansen receives grades, but he's not interested in literature as Tonio is. So for example, Tonio tells Hans Hansen to read a play of the German author Schiller's called Don Carlos. And Hans Hansen says, no, I don't want to, I prefer to read my books about horses, which have loads of pictures of horses running. So this just shows the contrast between Tonio and Hansen, that Tonio is more interested in literature, introverted, whilst Hansen is more, he receives good grades, but he's more, he leans towards the active and physical side. He admires these books because they have a bunch of pictures of horses. He's very visual and a man of the world. So Tonio and Hans Hansen are portrayed as two opposites. Unlike Hans Hansen, Tonio receives bad grades. He's not good in school. He is very much a daydreamer, not very focused, dreaming all the time and writing poetry. And this is one of the reasons why Tonio Kröger admires Hans Hansen so much. He says that for you, Hans Hansen, everything in the world is so easy and straightforward. You are good at sports, you get good grades, everyone likes you. For you, it's like life is like an easy dance. You just waltz through life. Whilst for me, Tonio, it's plagued with uncertainties and insecurities and not really knowing which direction to take or where to go. And a little bit background of Tonio Kröger. He comes from a rich bourgeois family. And what is great about this book is that you get an insight or a window into this 19th century bourgeois life. How they acted, how they talked, what they did. So for example, the next chapter after the one at the schoolyard, we observe Tonio Kröger in a dance lesson with this French absurd dance teacher who he sort of portrays as a humoristic figure. But just this thing as a dance lesson, this is a lost world for us today, and that's what it makes it so interesting. We get this insight into this lost bourgeois world, which we can not relate to, but sort of admire. So as we see, Tonio Kröger is a person who is split, who is out of touch with himself and his surroundings. And interestingly, Tonio Kröger claims that this split within himself comes from his dual heritage. And this duality we can hear in his name. Tonio, which is related to the name Antonio, is very Southern European, probably from Italy, whilst Kröger is a very German name. And Tonio Kröger has a German father and a Southern mother. He doesn't specify which country she's from, but she's from somewhere south of Europe, guessing maybe Italy or Spain. And his German father is a businessman, bourgeois, very practical, rational. He is described also as puritanical, has a melancholic personality. So all of the archetypes of this northern, practical, rational, unemotional person. While his mother has this thick black hair and is described as sensual, more naive, exotic, and not as organized as his father. So the result of this mixture, Tonio Kröger says, its result was a bourgeois who went astray into art, a bohemian homesick for his decent background, an artist with a bad conscience. So he describes himself as a mixture of this Nordic and Southerner. So the bohemian, the artistic, creative side from his mother, because Tonio, like Thomas Mann himself, is a writer in pursuit of the creative, but he also has this longing for the strict and organized bourgeois life. He doesn't want to leave the bourgeois life. So he is split between these two opposites, the Nordic and the Southern. And what I find interesting about this split, or this dualism between the Northerner and the Southern, is that Tonio Kröger, being a German, does not, as we would think, romanticize the South. This is very much the case for Northern Europe, for example, in Sweden, where I'm from, that we see ourselves, the North, as cold, dark, sort of not very lively, not very passionate, very like scheduled and organized, lacking in this vital, exotic life of the South, like in Italy. But instead, Tonio Kröger romanticizes the North. And this romanticization of the North is connected with his admiration of Hans Hansen. Throughout the book, Hans Hansen's Nordic qualities are always emphasized. For example, he's wearing a Danish hat. Tonio Kröger always notices his blue eyes and his light blonde hair. So the Nordic becomes synonymous with this commonplace, simple, bourgeois life, which Tonio Kröger feels out of place with. And in Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, it's the opposite. It is the South that is romanticized. So it's about this German author or writer who travels down to Venice and experiences different things and falls in love with this young, beautiful man. And there it's Venice, it's Italy, which is this place full of life and passion, which revitalizes this author. But Tonio Kröger, like I said, it's the opposite. It's the Southern that sort of becomes synonymous with his split, and he longs for the North. So in the last chapter of the book, Tonio Kröger is now a young man, maybe around 27 years old, and he has decided to travel to Denmark. And this trip has something fateful about it, because Denmark is mentioned over and over in the book. For example, in Hans Hansen's Danish hat. So we feel that something, this trip to Denmark, which we know is the last chapter, something fateful or decisive and conclusive is going to happen, and it does. So Tonio Kröger, he takes into this hotel room, this big hotel, and in the restaurant it's this big sort of party with a bunch of people. And there he sees a couple which he recognizes. It is Hans Hansen, his beloved friend, and Ingeborg together as a couple. And this becomes sort of the perfect union of everything he idealizes. His friend Hans Hansen and the woman he loved, who's named Ingeborg, which is a very sort of Scandinavian northern name, so she also symbolizes this Nordic, simple, easy life which Tonio Kröger lacks. And it's this perfect union between them, literally, because they're both there, a couple together. So Tonio Kröger feels melancholic and out of place from this party and leaves. And as he leaves, he wishes that Ingeborg would come running after him and say, quote, "Come back and join us. Don't be sad. I love you." And he continues, "But she did not come. Such things do not happen. Yes, it was all as if it had been long ago. And he was happy as he had been long ago, for his heart was alive." So this long ago, I think, refers back to the first chapter, when Tonio Kröger feels outside as he sees his friend Hans Hansen in this big group and feeling forgotten by him. And what is interesting is that in this melancholy, in this being alone, not being together with the person that he loves, which is Hans Hansen in the first scene, and then in this last trip in Denmark, Hans Hansen and Ingeborg, the two people he loved. Within this melancholy, he says he was happy. I am happy. And I was happy as I had been before, which means that in this first scene, when he sees that Hans Hansen has forgotten about their walk together, that within this melancholy, that he felt some sort of happiness and contentment, because he says his heart lived in these moments of melancholy. He felt alive. He felt a deep connection with himself and his soul. And Tonio Kröger does not say what this happiness arises from, but I believe it's connected with him as being an artist, a writer. So as I mentioned before, Tonio Kröger he loves poetry, he loves literature, he aspires to be a writer, and it's not mentioned directly, but throughout his life he becomes an author. So the reason why these scenes of loneliness and outsideness and annihilation is that these scenes become fuel, become sort of material which he can use in his stories. He can write about these scenes. He can write about when Hans Hansen forgot him after school. And I think this is true because the most beautiful books, the most beautiful scenes are the ones which in life is experienced as sad or melancholic or as suffering, but which the artist, when portraying them in painting or in literature, can create beautiful literature with. And I think this is because, for two reasons, because it is with what we call negative emotions such as melancholy that are felt the deepest and felt the most profoundest, from which literature can be creative. Sort of superficial emotions such as happiness and contentment, such as Hans Hansen feels, can never generate deep feeling and thus not deep art. And that is why I think Hans Hansen is not interested in literature. He's interested in the simple things in life, such as riding and gymnastics. And that's why he can never become an author, because he hasn't felt these deep feelings of melancholy and outsideness, which Tonio Kröger does. Because Hans Hansen, he's always surrounded with friends and everything is so easy. And when life is easy, there's no friction, there's no reason to become self-conscious of oneself and the world around them. You're one with your world, you're content, and thus not able to take a step away from life to see it at a distance from the situation of being alone or being outside, not being part of the friendship group. And I think this consolation of being a writer sort of becomes his mystical becomes Tonio Kröger's mystical union between the northern and southerner, because he describes throughout the book of his writing as work. So describing literature as work, he has combined the southerner, the literature, the creative, and the disciplined work of the Nordic bourgeois. So they've been united, and that's why I think he feels happy despite the melancholy, because he is united both of the sides of his dual heritage, but also that he's able to channel his melancholy into something extremely meaningful, which gives his life meaning, which is literature, which is writing. So I don't know what you guys think about the scenes from Tonio Kröger's life which is described, but I don't experience them as sad. I notice the melancholy in them, but I don't think they're depressive. I think they're beautiful. I think they're so artfully constructed, and they have such deep emotions with which we can empathize with and see ourselves in. Alright, so that has been Tonio Kröger by Thomas Mann, and I really recommend the book because it's beautifully written and it's short, so you read it quickly. And I'm really interested to hear people who have read this book. How do you guys experience it? Do you experience this as just depressing or as a beautiful story with emotional depth? And why do you think that Tonio Kröger, in the midst of this alienation and melancholy, being outside and rejected by Hans Hansen and Ingeborg, why does he say that he is happy in the midst of these scenes? So I have my theories about it, what I think, and which aren't definite because Thomas Mann doesn't describe exactly why he feels happy. He just says, and I felt happy. So what do you guys think? I'll be interested to hear.